Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode number 122, Static Applications and JAMStack Radio. Well, JAMStack Applications Stack, I guess. Today we have on the panel Amal, Hussein.
Hi, everyone.
Myself, Erik, Isaksen, and maybe to join us in a little bit, Justin Rivera. And our guest today, I'll let him introduce himself. He has a new podcast. He works at Netlify, and he is working on JAMStackness.
Yeah, Brian Douglas here. Yeah, like Erik said, I'm here in the Bay Area, work for Netlify, and also do a podcast as well called JAMStack Radio, where we focus on JavaScript, APIs, and markup, which is basically a term that kind of just couples up of what the new static is. A lot of people call it modern web. The new dynamic is another term that gets thrown around. So we like the term jam, and that's what I talked about on a weekly basis on the podcast.
Yeah, we were talking earlier too, where that has a lot of, I guess, musical kind of influence on that. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
a lot of developers are. A lot of developers though are very, very musical. So that's pretty cool.
So I will have to admit that I didn't know what JAMStack meant until reading about this podcast today with you. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about what it means? And
yeah, I'll give you a bit of background and basically what we're aiming for as far as like spreading the jam, as what we like to say. So JAMStack is, again, it's JavaScript, APIs, and markup. A lot of people pair it up with static because that's what it was. But the founder of Netlify, Matt Billman, before Netlify was even around, they noticed a trend. Him and one of his friends noticed a trend of modern build tools coming in the scene. So not only do you have like things like Git, but you also have things like Gulp, Grunt, and now we have Webpack and Rollup and et cetera, et cetera. And no longer are you just like throwing all your code into an index.html and adding some script tags and some CSS to the same page and stuff like that. You now have the idea of Grunt and Gulp and Webpack, which now also, in addition to Node, we've moved into the world where now we have new JavaScript frameworks on a regular basis. So even things like React and Angular can also be paired with to something like you would think a static when there's no server that you have to run. So the term was very confusing because Netlify, basically our pitch is that we're a hosting tool for front-end developers. So if you have a static site, we can host it. Like no need to actually host it on Heroku where you have to have a server or run some sort of like build pack or anything like that on DigitalOcean or anything like that. You can host static pretty cheaply and basically free. And when people come to us and ask us if they can host their site, well, we had to come up with a term that actually made sense to say, well, does your site fall within these like realms of possibilities to host with us? So that's where JAMStack came upon. So if you use a build tool, if you're integrated with Git, if you use Git, it makes it a lot easier because you probably fall within the line of what we need you to do to host on Netlify for free. And so things like React, if you're using Webpack and you have a build command, then you're most likely using JAMStack. And this is the absence of any sort of need of servers. So we're server agnostic. So if you have a server, more than likely you'd probably want to point it to an API, which then your static site can actually consume, which is even more about the API part of Jam. So that's like the basic gist of it. I don't know if you guys have any follow-up questions for me to maybe explain more about JAMStack, but that's basically what it is.
So with JAMStack, though, you guys invented the terminology, but the technologies are pretty core. It's not tied to any framework, as you had said. It's just very JavaScript and markup, basically, right?
Yeah, pretty agnostic to frameworks.
Yeah, which is great. I think it's a great fit. There are other companies that do static hosting. I mean, you could go with Amazon and just do like straight static stuff, but you'll have a lot of overhead as far as like, well, how do I organize this code and put this together, connect these things? But Netlify, I used on a project here at Carfax, and it was a hackathon project, and I really enjoyed the experience. It was really well done. I had used tools like DivShot before, which was consumed I guess sort of consumed by Google because
They
Michael
consume-
Blay, who used to own it,
Yeah, they
works
consume the
now works
technology.
with Firebase.
Yeah, they consume. I was actually a pretty heavy DivShot user back in the day. Well, back in the day, like maybe a year and a half ago, I guess is when that happened. So I use it a lot for my Ember apps, and I liked it a lot. But like you said, Firebase consumed it, and then Google consumed Firebase. I think Firebase was actually consumed by Google before that. But regardless of time, it was consumed. It disappeared. But it was nice because you could just throw up your front end app pretty easily. And the nice thing about Netlify, it's actually pretty agnostic to technology-wise. So instead of using something like a Firebase hosting, which now is what DivShot is, or using like even something as simple as S3, we actually hook into your build command. So if you have a build command, we actually will watch your repo for you on Git or GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, whatever your choice is. And whenever you push your changes, we run your build command for you on that branch. So if you choose your master branch, so similar to the way GitHub Pages has set up, where you can watch your GH Pages branch or your master branch if it's your portfolio, we'll watch that branch, and when that branch has changes, we'll actually push a new version atomically deployed. So which gives you the ability to roll back to any previous changes as well, and it's all stored thanks to Git and using commits and stuff like that.
So it seems like it would be a good fit if you're using like Git Flow or something,
Oh, yeah.
where then you can have to work into like a merge into this one branch that you're going to use for that. So similar to GH Pages, as you said, GitHub Pages. One of the things I really enjoyed about using like Firebase hosting or DivShot was that CLI tool and also environments. Those are the two things that I really liked and I was surprised by. Can you talk about like why the approach of an interface, or do you have some type of CLI tool or environments?
Yeah, we do have a CLI tool. It's pretty much in parity with what you would get with Firebase hosting. You do have desktop environments too, but Netlify, we actually approach it slightly different, where every branch you have is an environment. So if you have a staging branch, development branch, a master branch, if you follow the whole Git flow, every branch is deployable. So what we have for our pro plans, but also open source projects, which is free for anybody who has an open source project, we deploy every branch for you. So which is really interesting, because when you open up a pull request, and let's say if you have some sort of open source user that's fix some copy on your page, they open a pull request inside your CI on GitHub. And I go to GitHub because that's my choice of Git provider. This happens with every other provider as well, but I happen to use GitHub, so I know it better. So within the CI, you can click the link where it has your deploy preview. So for any changes, like I just made some changes to the gulp js.org. I made some changes. If you want to check it out now, I'm pretty proud of it. I added some SVGs to their site, and I just added a deploy preview to my pull request, so that way they can just check it out live. No need to clone my branch, pull it locally, and all this is done because we have tools like things like gulp and Git and GitHub, where we can actually just integrate right in the CI. So that way, every time someone on the team pushes up a front end change, no one needs to clone anything. Like imagine if you had a marketing individual that needs to check updates for copy. Most likely some PMs are more technical, some marketing people are more technical, but most likely your marketing individual is not going to want to actually go in there and pull changes locally and install Git and Tower or whatever you need to do to see whatever changes are. They should just be able to click a link. And that's what Netlify integrates. And that's why we integrate into the build command in Git for that reason. So that way you can have atomic deploys to see all the changes live on every branch and every environment.
That honestly, that sounds so incredible. I'm on a pretty big dev team, and that would save us a ton of time if we use that. And so, can teams integrate this into their existing workflows if they're working on, private software or non-open source software?
Yeah, we do offer for anybody who has a private repo as well. You can integrate Netlify. The key, really, again, going back to JAMStack, is having that build command and the build tool. Like if you're building your site, then we can most likely host it on Netlify, and you can most likely host it anywhere else too as well. There's other like Now and Surge as well as another thing. But we like the fact that we integrate to that build command. There is a popular open source project, I guess Kubernetes. They actually came to us. They're not fully on board with us yet. We still have some PRs that they need to merge because they had a workflow where they would use S3 as a backend. So every time, basically what we have is our features called deploy previews. They basically rebuilt deploy previews using Docker containers in S3. So every time they push up to Git, it would push to S3. And I missed all the details because I didn't build it, so I don't really know exactly what they're doing. But they had this whole process of where they have their own CDN that they built using Docker containers to push a deploy to be able to preview it inside a GitHub pull request. They basically rebuilt our deploy previews features that we already had for them. So they're actually on board to doing it. I forget the issue number. I could probably give you give it to you for the show notes if some people want to check it out to see what their process is for integrating in Netlify. But to Eric, to your point earlier, like S3, you can use S3, but the problem is you do have to, once you have your actual static index HTML on S3, you didn't have to think about CloudFront and Cloudflare for SSL and then CloudFront for CDN distribution. And then you got to think of all the other things that I can't even remember the names of that inside the AWS console that you have to configure just to not only just get your static site up, but just get your static site to the form where it's modern, where you have SSL, you have a proper CDN, you have custom domains, which is not built out of the box for S3 as well. You have to add another add-on, which of Route 53 to do your DNS routing as well, which becomes kind of tedious when you're just trying to put up your blog of like your cat pictures and stuff like that.
So I guess you guys are taking continuous integration and taking it one step further with continuous deployment, right? And making it more seamless. Like you're kind of fixing that problem, which is amazing. I'm wondering how long it's going to take for Amazon to buy your company. Because it seems like you'd be solving a pretty big pain point that they haven't solved yet.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm just not sure if Amazon, like I'm pretty sure we love to talk to them, but I'm pretty sure Amazon too, they like the fact that you could piecemeal your ideas together. So you have all these other tools that are built, like Heroku is built on top of Amazon. Heroku is a very popular deployment tool to deploy your Rails apps. You don't have to integrate, like deploying Rails to Amazon is pretty painful. I've done it once, like entirely one time, the entire time I've done Rails, because it's painful. And so Amazon, but there's also people who like to have that process. Like if you have a specific process, if you have proprietary software that you don't want to be in GitHub, that you want to just hit like with an API or some sort of other like Ansible command or whatnot in the back end, it's appealing to certain people. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, other people are catching up with us as far as like build commands. I'm not sure if there's anybody that's like up to parity with Netlify, but the whole point of having JAMStack as a term is that we want more people in the space. We want the idea of separating your back end and your front end to be able to host your front end separately, to make things a little more ideal. Like when you separate and that's another part I didn't really get into. When JavaScript APIs and markup, it's about the separation. I originally got into front end development through Ember, which Ember was really big in the separation of concerns, where you had your API that you just placed into your adapter that you can actually just parse like all your Ember data into your project. That was nice, and it made a lot of sense because then you could just host your Ember app anywhere. Netlify is very much about that, where have your build command, and if you have that, where you can bundle everything down into an index to HTML through Webpack or Rollup or Gulp or Grunt or whatever, what have you. Then that's more ideal because then you open up the door to things like you block out security and vulnerable when you have like you don't have a SQL server running like open on your actual index.html and our script tag. You don't have any sort of exposure that way. But then you also make things like SSL super easy. So Netlify, we love the fact that we partner with Let's Encrypt, where all you have to do is just click one button, and we automatically enable SSL for your custom domains out of the box, which is super nice. And there's no backend to configure for that.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I was actually going to ask about that. It seems like you're kind of enforcing a paradigm shift. It's maybe not a shift, but it's definitely an adoption of separating, having a self-hosted static site. For teams with legacy projects where, their index page might be hosted by their server, and, they've got all this kind of like intermingling between their systems, so this is kind of a cleaner, more modern approach where, you have your static site, and it's calling your API server or API servers, right? So
yeah, and it's valuable too to have like a separation between, especially if you're like have a team that you need that separation between front end and back end. You have back end developers, you have front end developers. It's really interesting, the space. Like, so you guys on the call are all front end developers, but it's interesting how the term front end is like changed even more so within the last few years.
Absolutely.
We're now, before front end used to be, oh, that's just the CSS people. Like they just like make stuff purple and like make sure things like are aligned, which is almost impossible. And thanks to Flexbox now, it makes it a lot easier. But now like my front end, I'm a front end developer, but I hardly touch CSS because all I do is touch Redux stores and make actions and reducers, because we do a lot of React at Netlify. And it's amusing because before I started at Netlify, I was a full stack developer where I did back end, front end, everything. And now I feel like I'm still a full stack developer, but I just touch Redux all day. So it's like, it's weird that the paradigm is even shifting, even just in the term front end, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, a friend of mine coined the term, the browser is the new server. And so, I really, ultimately, like, people writing JavaScript are thinking about queuing and like, batching and all these other types of mechanisms that, you would never think of in JavaScript 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, and with JAMStack, it's just taking all that stuff that you would normally server render, server scripting, all that stuff, pull it to the client side. So things like, I mentioned Redux, which is like the popular React version of data management. There's other tools as well, like Ember Data and stuff like that. But what you would normally do, like serialization, all that stuff you would do on the back end, you're now moving towards the front end, where now you're just hitting your I joked with yeah, it's a state management. I joked with another guy here in SF at a meetup where it's the back end for your front end. So like you have your back end, but then you like populate all your back end for your front end, which is your Redux store, your JSON store that just gets populated. And then you just spend all day doing that. And you just never touch CSS or HTML or whatever as far as markup, which is interesting as a shift that's happened like in a short amount of time.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if we over-engineer a lot of this. Like I've been using a lot of Redux and React lately as well, and it reminds me of like working with like even MVC was the same working with Rails, where you got to do like 3 or 4 files before you can get like something simple done. Yeah,
I'm actually doing a talk here at SF at the React SF meetup. Hopefully, I'll get it accepted in one of the bigger conferences, but giving it this actually in 2 days, and it's about managing your data in React without Redux. And basically the whole talk is basically about how complicated Redux can be for simple things. And that most people, I think, since Redux is kind of won out as the Flux architecture, a lot of people just shift to it like too quickly, when you could just focus on just actual UI instead of working on data. And so I'm actually going to talk through other options that don't include Flux to manage your React app.
Well, the plus side is it has all that support. Like it's backed up by Facebook, more or less. And, you get that, but it is fairly complex. I would agree.
Well, yeah, but to be clear though, Redux solves a very big problem, right? And it's also use the right tool for the right job.
Yeah.
And and if you're building a simple blog site, well, maybe you don't really need to keep track of state, in a central store, and maybe you're fine just using set state, right? So, and I know like Dan Abramoff is constantly also like pushing the same idea of like, hey, like set state is okay. It's not, it's not a bad thing. You just have to, use it wisely and know when your application needs something better to manage its state, and when you're fine just using it locally.
Yeah, which again, I push it back to JAMStack as well, which is the whole mindset of you want to start an app today. Let's say it's a blog or some app for some marketing company that wants to sell marketing data. You could start that entire app using an entire fully functional, like I'll go back to Rails because that's what I'm familiar with. Like you could start that whole app in Rails, which gets you all that stuff out of the box. But you might be solving, like Rails solves particular part of problems that you need to solve, like CRUD and doing MVC, but not everything is an MVC app. For example, a lot of apps I make just consume data. Like I just present data on the page, just prettify it and make it look much better. That doesn't sound like it needs to be Rails. Like I could just use a small like React or even Vue.js, which is pretty nice for this because you just have like you can have Vue.js work with Webpack to do some script tags, like which seems weird now that we're like I would even like recommend just go to a script tag and index the HTML, but sometimes a site just needs that. Like this needs a little jQuery to make something work, and that's it. So my part of my job is I do front-end development, but I also do a lot of like tinkering to see what works with Netlify. So I'll build like a small app. Like right now I'm building a site with GraphQL and GitHub, the GitHub API, just to manage my notifications better. Hopefully I'll finish it. I've been working on it for like 2 months. It's way too long, but I keep perfecting it, I guess. I don't know. But I just want to take my GitHub notifications, present it on a page, and then click a link to go to that issue or click to go to that PR whenever I get a PR. Because if you've used notifications in GitHub, it's not real quick, cut and dry. Like it's almost confusing trying to manage multiple repos and then also open source projects, which is GitHub's interface. So I'm trying to make it better, but I'm also using GraphQL to do it. So I don't need to have a CRUD app to update anything on GitHub. I can just use it to read GitHub data and then go to GitHub. Yeah.
And you had one of the API people from GitHub on your show, I remember.
Yeah. GitHub's they recently switched to. Well, you had a GraphQL episode a couple weeks ago as well.
Yep.
But yeah, GraphQL is a very popular. It's changing the paradigm of how people are managing data for your front end apps, and it's quite interesting. I highly recommend anybody check out that podcast you guys just had to find out more for sure.
Well, there's a lot. Yeah, we should get back on track with JAMStack, but just one last point is, there's definitely a paradigm shift in general with APIs, right? Like no longer, is it the standard to kind of have, your JavaScript show up and then make an API call to go fetch the data, right? Like you're looking at more reactive architectures that are, more event-based, really, and that are more proactive about when and where they fetch data. So anyway, so back to JAMStack. So I guess so tell us so just to summarize, when is JAMStack useful, and I guess when is it not, right? Like we talked about if you have a server, or if you I guess when can you not use Netlify and
yeah, so the term that really goes against JAMStack is isomorphic or universal. It became pretty popular in the last couple of years, where you can have your JavaScript on your back end, your JavaScript on your front end. The problem is that you rely too much on a server directly, so there's not that separation of concerns. So we don't host any node served applications. So if your listeners are familiar with the package.json and npm, if you're running npm start to see your app and then deploy it, we don't do that. If you have an npm run build command that you're either calling Webpack or again Grunt, Gulp, all those other ones I keep naming, then that's what we can host on Netlify. So if your site gets bundled, minified, uglified, all those other things, if you're doing any of that, that's what we host. And we host those because those tend to be smaller, faster, and it fits with what our architecture is. There are other solutions if you have a server-based project like a Rails or fully functional, like if you're still using Meter at this point. There are other tools to serve that, but we don't serve any of those types of apps because we feel like that's not where the future is going as far as architecture and applications. I understand that there's a lot of apps that are already existing that do have a server base. Like I just talked to a guy pretty popular in the JavaScript space, does some tutorials on the web, and talked about potentially hosting on Netlify. And he was stuck because he uses all his login based system all runs to a node server. So it was actually not a fit because actually users logging in and tracking data and stuff like that for his courses was all served on a node server that was on some sort of Postgres database in the back end. And so we couldn't take that Postgres database with us and host it on Netlify. So my recommendation was to separate the server.js separate to be able to build using Webpack, which he wasn't using Webpack as well. So like if you're not in the sort of like the trend of the modern build tools, then most likely you can't host with Netlify unless you did some sort of like witchcraft. On the other end of the spectrum too. So we talked a lot about JavaScript, but we do get a lot of people who use WordPress as a solution or a Drupal. And so I just because of space that I usually am in, I don't really talk to many WordPress developers. But obviously we can't host WordPress because we don't do PHP as well. But there are some popular tools, which is if Shifter, getshifter.io, which is a cool tool where you can bundle your WordPress site into a static site. So it actually reads it similar to, which is on our show notes, similar to like pre-rendering. It actually renders your app and then takes that static output of your WordPress site. And then you can host that on Netlify. But yeah, anything that renders to static in a bundle form is hostable.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, that is pretty awesome. And so regarding the like for instance, so like if somebody, you don't have to use Webpack, but if somebody uses, ES5 and they're not they don't need to transpile their JavaScript. There's nothing in there that needs to bundle. They can also use Netlify, right? There's no.
Yeah, as long as you have an index.html that we point to. So that's like almost a key for Netlify too as well. Like if you bundle to index.html, that's the one file we're looking for. So if you run npm run build and there's a build or a dist folder that gets generated, usually that from Webpack you'll have an output and it creates that for you. That's usually what Netlify is looking for, because all that script tags and stuff like that dynamically gets added in your bundle.js. So any of that works.
I want to just understand a little bit too, just so I'm clear on it. If I have like the build tool like you were talking about earlier, and I deploy the application, the obviously the one that I built locally, that would go to your servers, and then from there, if I wanted to promote that to a staging environment, right? Do you have tools to integrate with like testing for CI to go into that environment to take that branch of code and push it up there, or does it take from the original? Like how does that work?
So it sounds like something like CI like Travis or something like that.
Yeah, I'm assuming that you can't just use any old CI with this. Like
yeah, so we
use something with Travis or something.
Yeah, so you don't really need
Maybe Circle.
Yeah, you don't need Travis with like with Netlify, because we do that already under the hood. That's how we get it up on GitHub, and we push like the new version of your site atomically. Like again, like all your pushes to GitHub get deployed, and they're always there, like ready for you to roll back if you need to. But yeah, you could integrate with Circle with we have a feature with build hooks. So if you wanted to, or you can just go straight to GitHub as well too, where you can actually just wait until your CI passes on GitHub. So if Circle fails, then Netlify will be prevented from deploying, if that makes sense. So you could integrate. We actually use internally, we use Jenkins, which is very similar to Circle. So if our Jenkins fails, we don't deploy a new version of our site live to production. So you can integrate with CI that way. So either going directly to Circle or just leveraging GitHub as well in their CI tool.
And earlier you talked about using React over at Netlify.
Yeah.
And seems like to be the trend these days. So that's good. And you have the build tools that you're integrating with everything. Do you have any considerations if you're sharing, and maybe you don't have these because I know a lot of React applications don't, but if you have shared React components, right, that are hosted separately, like how does that work with Netlify, where you have like a Polymer app or a web components type of application, React? Does it change if you have all these different components inside there?
It doesn't. So we actually use Elm as part of our production in our production app. So our CTO actually built an Elm app. So whenever you put a deploy preview that's not master, on the top of the bar, it will show like you have deployed. This is a preview. This is not production. Like FY, don't send this out to people, or if people see it, don't start like committing. Like a lot, we use it for our blogs. So if we have a preview of our blog, it just says like, hey, this is like not actual live, so don't start putting it on Hacker News or anything like that. So that's an Elm app, and it's Elm app that lives inside of our React app. And we just add that using our Webpack config. We just add that as part of our bundle. So inside the Webpack, it actually, there's again, I don't know exactly which plugin it is, but there's a Webpack plugin to actually build Elm. And it actually looks for the Elm package, builds it, puts it in our index.html, and then that's just live, ready to go. So as far as your build process, as long as that happens before you host it on Netlify, then you're good to go. So if you wanted to have another thing that we have is a CMS. So we have the Netlify CMS is what it's called. Check it out on GitHub. It's open source. But what we do in a static site, so we have static site generators, things like Jekyll, Hugo, Middleman. You could take our React app, which is a Netlify CMS, and embed it into your static site. So like a middleman. So as part of your build tools, you just point your Netlify CMS folder into your public structure as well, which is pretty cool. I highly recommend checking it out. We don't have as much documentation out there because it's fairly like recent that we actually unveiled our Netlify CMS. But there's another tool called Datto CMS, DATO CMS. They're further along, and it's more of a commercial product as well. They do something very similar too as well, where they have a CMS built on top of your static site. So again, going back to like the marketing professional who's not as technical that just wants to update a blog post, can just go to yourblog.com/admin and then start editing. It's the same workflow as a lot of people might be familiar with Ghost, which is a blogging platform that's still around. It has an admin panel as well. Datto does something very similar. Netlify CMS is something similar as well. It's just pushing the movement of CMSs along. And going back to WordPress, this is like a pitch for anybody coming from WordPress who likes the CMS. There's open source CMSs that you can attach to static sites and JAMStack sites as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lately, we've been working on researching API-based CMSs.
Okay.
And those are great for static applications, all applications. But it's
like
interesting,
like Contentful.
Like Contentful.
Yeah,
Contentful's a good one. There's a Prism, I think, or
yep,
that's another good one. But we haven't decided on one for sure. But we have a lot of different needs. Like we have WordPress, we have Joomla. We want to get rid of these things, and so we have to kind of think, what makes it easier so that they can do their thing, and the marketing and the business side. And we can also, as developers, not want to cry when we use CMS, right?
Yeah.
And have to update things. So when I say CMS to developers, they immediately start like either crying or like getting angry.
I'm crying and getting angry.
But it's interesting though with static applications that we can finally have something that's like true CMS type of stuff where you can have a scaled application now and have an API-based CMS where you can model your data, describe it. Templates are separate from that. So so stuff like that would integrate well, I would think, with Netlify.
Yeah, I think CMSs are going to be, I think maybe another like another open field, I guess, of like possibilities where people were doing it all the one way. And I think even last year with Facebook's unveiling of Draft.js, it was kind of underwhelming, their unveiling. They just kind of mentioned it there. It's like in passing, hey, by the way, we did Draft.js, like go ahead and tinker with it. Some CMSs have come because of Draft.js. So again, everybody does React. So if you're already using React and you can build statically, like Webpack has a plugin called like the static site generator plugin. So just dropping that in there, using Draft.js to build like a quick CMS to make stuff work. Ideally for all these non-technical professionals that want to use something similar to WordPress. And that's what we've kind of pushed towards with the Netlify CMS. Like we started with Draft.js, we actually use a newer version of Draft.js, which is Slate. I guess Draft.js wasn't moving fast enough for some people for a CMS option. So they created Slate, and we use Slate, and that's what's built on the back of Netlify CMS.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I'm excited. This is like a brave new world for CMSs. They're getting a revitalization here. Actually, a couple quick questions on performance, and then I guess maybe just mobile. I'll group them. But so in terms of code splitting and bundle size and all of those things. All of that is still, I'm assuming, like all those responsibilities still fall on the developers, right? There's nothing that Netlify really does to assist with that, I'm assuming.
Now, we do have some options for helping your bundle size. So things we have like post processing, we do have, but really you want to really leverage like your build tool. So if you're worried about like code splitting or bundle size, it really goes down to it again, like you said, it goes down to developers. So if your bundle size is huge and your build takes forever, then you probably want to like do some sort of like add some plugin or figure out where the issue is on your code's end. We are working pretty heavily. Like we have we're a team of 10 now, and working pretty fast to push out features and help out the developer experience. But at this point, it really kind of lies on the developer to make sure your bundle is optimal for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And I guess it's a good segue into mobile. So I guess what are some of the mobile first strategies for
So JAMStack doesn't really have a mobile first strategy. I mentioned to Erik earlier, and also I just want to preface too that Netlify is a developer tool, so it's not a tool that you would hand over to like some restaurant owner or et cetera, and say, here, this is how you build your website. It's just push to get. Like this is a developer tool, so this is for the developer to help their workflow. We don't have a specific mobile first strategy, but we do coincide really well with Progressive Web Apps, which does have a mobile first strategy and does recommend small build size stuff that works on 2G. We are I've been doing some testing with Preact and how it works with React, and doing some blog posts to recommend actual things to optimize your mobile strategy and stuff like that. I'm still in the works. I've got a lot of stuff going, a lot of open, or I guess balls up in the air while I'm trying to juggle my day to day. But yeah, we don't have a specific mobile first strategy that I could speak to specifically, other than that would just coincide with the progressive web app movement of trying to be mobile first and offline ready with service workers as well, which all that works as long as it bundles with your app.
Okay, cool, awesome. And so anything in specific in terms of PWAs like that Netlify has, and making it easier for developers to build progressive apps?
No, nothing super specific. Again, like since we integrate with the build tool and on the build command, like you want to make sure your builds are running smoothly. You want to make sure that your bundles are small. You want to make sure that stuff works locally as well. But nothing that specific. PWA it's a fairly recent term. It's kind of taken the developer community by storm. It's quite popular, and I think it's going to be very interesting seeing how it works in the future as people are starting to look at their bundle size. Which I didn't think React was that big of a bundle, but now that people are talking about it, now I'm looking at all my bundle sizes and seeing like what sort of packages that I'm duplicating, and there are some sort of code splitting that I could do to make things happen much better.
Now, Preact is the web components React mix.
It's a small. It's basically React taking out synthetic events, prop type validations, and just making the entire bundle smaller.
Gotcha.
As far as gzipped, so React gzipped is 39 kilobits. Preact is 3 kilobits. So right off the bat, you just take off all the stuff you don't use in React that's just built up on the library so long in the past couple of years, and Preact just removes all that. With that being said, React Fiber is supposed to handle like the reason why you'd want to use React Fiber is supposed to take care of all that, which is supposed to be the cleaner version of the React API. But I think you can go to isfiberready.com to check out the progress on that.
All right, is Fiber ready? Check that out. We were just talking about mobile first, and I think a lot of the front end developers try to do that, and sometimes we can't get to that. One of the things that we've been discussing at my workplace is dealing with SEO, right? So we need pre-rendered pages, and when you're working with a lot of different pieces like React, you have APIs you're pulling in. And if you want to do it with isomorphic or universal, however you want to call it, you can do that, and it's a much lower barrier to entry. But we have a lot of different applications we use here. So we have Rails apps, Angular apps, so we're using lots of different technologies, Python, Ruby, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of the front end stuff that we're working on, sure, Universal will be fine. But if we want to like have a Java app, for instance, we would need something like pre-render IO, or I know you guys use the open source pre-render IO on Netlify.
Yeah.
Because that's what we use in our hackathon. And so we're looking at possibly using something like that or building something like that, and also to serve up templates for adaptive web templates, so that when you're serving to a mobile device, before the pre-render, we're smart enough to say, hey, use this template and pull this down so you don't have all that extra stuff in there, so that your file size goes way down, right? Your speed is improved. And that's really important for, like you were saying before, 2G connections and mobile first type strategies. So improving the performance is going to help SEO right away. And also the pre-rendering will help to get that really, good content coming through. So what are some strategies you've seen for sharing to do like pre-rendering across multiple, types of applications like that? Using Netlify, like, is that something that's possible?
Yeah. Well, not at the moment. We're actually actively working on an A/B testing solution, which you could also override. Hopefully, we'll see how it works. It's going to be in the next month or so. But you could hopefully override the possibility of sharing different versions of your app in different situations. But there, as of today, we don't have that available to users. But with pre-rendering, it's just really, we should be able to use something like Launch Darkly, I think, which just embeds a script tag. So based on the script tag, it will render a different version of your app for the user. I'm not sure if I answered the question correctly, but we don't have an out-of-box solution for Netlify, and I don't know.
Not sure if I asked it correctly. So
yeah, I don't think we have we definitely don't have an out-of-box solution for that use case today. But there are tools like Launch Darkly that could possibly do that. And then similar to the way pre-rendering works, so they're looking at the user agent. I've never done this before, so I'm just might be speaking out of turn, but I think you could be able to run a different bundle based on the user agent. So if you wanted to bundle differently, you might be able to do that. I mean, if I were to try that, that'd be the first thing I tried. To see if I can run a different bundle based on the user agent, to see if I can optimize that. But yeah, so I might just be speaking out in circles and pie in the sky. But yeah, we don't really have a solution at the moment.
Yeah, because responsive web design, it's awesome, but it doesn't take it all the way, right? Because you're just hiding and showing a lot of things. You're adjusting certain components within that application. So it's not like something with the adaptive approach and a combination of adaptive and responsive. You can really get some good performance boosts by doing that. So yeah, a tool like that, I'm going to look into this Darkly.
Yeah, I've been looking at service workers, which is fairly new in the Chrome spec, to be able to use service workers to cache your site. So I wonder if service workers, if that might be the tool to
well, yeah, you can use service workers for that. You can do a whole build inside your service worker if you want to.
Okay.
You could run Webpack in there and everything, but and these are core to the PWA movements that we're seeing. But the thing with that is you can't count on service worker. Service worker is great because when it works, it'll work, and if it doesn't work, it's not gonna break everything.
Yeah.
So it's progressive in that sense, which is great. But if it doesn't work and you have something core to your application which requires it, that's where I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah.
Like if it has to work for IE 10, that feels so good to say. I don't have to say IE 8 anymore. If it has to work for IE 10, or IE 11 even, which is, the next breakthrough soon, then, that's great. It'll work then. Not with service worker though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we're almost at a close here, so we'll try to get in our last few questions. This is a burning question I have. So I feel like you guys would be kind of the gurus on how to best structure your application really, like with your front end piece and your back end piece. And so I guess with managing APIs, like what's some advice that you guys have on, like how to deal with multiple domains, cores, et cetera, managing an API gateway? What does that really look like? And what are some tools and good ways to manage that?
Yeah, so managing APIs really it relies on your use case. So like, for example, I do a lot of React. All of our APIs are built into, whenever the fetching happens, it happens in Redux actions at the moment. So it just looks very similar. I guess it's just different because we talk to multiple APIs at the time. So Redux is I kind of dogged Redux earlier, but Redux is a really good option for that because we can just fire specific actions to do that. We do use for all of our statically built, like things like our blog and our marketing sites, we use Hugo, which is a static site generator. So on top of Hugo, we've built a new project called Victor Hugo, which basically it's the same thing, but it just adds like instead of it has an asset pipeline. So basically, we use Gulp and Webpack on top of the regular Hugo bundle, and with Gulp, we can do other clever things like adding search to our site. With we don't actually use, I forget which we don't use Algolia, but we use something else. But we add search by using that. So we have access to gathering API data because we can have a build tool like Gulp, which looks a lot similar to what our Redux actions looks like at the moment.
So I did want to ask, one of the things that people ask me too about static applications from before JAMStack and now is authorization, security, authentication. I know you touched on it a little bit, but there's always that feeling that on the front end, JavaScript is very insecure, and I know that that's not the case, but a lot of people have said that. A lot of developers, they get upset about it. I mean, there's tools like Auth0 as a service you could use. What do you recommend for static applications in general? Whether it's Netlify or anything to do those types of security features.
Yeah. So I like Auth0. We're big fans at Netlify. We don't have an integration yet, hopefully soon. But my recommendation is, so we talked a lot about static and we talked a lot about JAMStack, but it doesn't mean that you can't use a server. So if you have to do authorization, I would say build an authorization server. Like if you need to have authorization on your database, build that in your server and then point that to your API. So that way we use like JSON web tokens. Based on the tokens, we can actually confirm stuff going back and forth to the server. So though, like Netlify, we don't host your server. We don't host any of that stuff for you. All that sort of logic would live on your server. So if you did have some sort of business logic for your data, that would all just live through there.
So would you recommend like also an OpenID Connect type of server that go across multiple apps if you had those?
I'm not as familiar with them. Like, can you explain OpenID? Is that like the having
so Anvil.io is one of them that Christian, who used to be a panelist on here, had created. And basically it's a server that does management of your security. So it'll have profiles of your users, almost like an Active Directory, but as a service, right? And then it'll pass JSON web tokens and encrypt.
Yeah, something like this would be pretty ideal because you don't have to even point to a server. You could just throw this into a script tag, hopefully protected script tag, or have this bundled into your bundled JS if you're using Webpack. But I would recommend something like this for sure. I'm just looking at the site now, as well as Auth0 too, like managing your security through a service like this.
Yeah, Christian's going to be really upset with me because I mentioned Auth0.
Oh, I love Auth0. We'll have to check out Christian's tool. Oh, I love Auth0. It's pretty cool. Makes it easy.
Yeah, they've got their stuff together for sure. So there's the security end of it, which is great. Integration, obviously, for static applications with different APIs has been improved so much since the days of having to use iframe hacks and JSONP hacks with that. like Facebook and Twitter have really opened up the doors, I think, for that. What are the trade-offs, do you think, with static applications versus the traditional full stack?
Yeah, I think the trade-offs would just be domain-specific knowledge. So if you're working on a team and everything's in one repo, obviously that is easier, having people move in and out of the team on and off the project, like being able to find where things are. You don't have to open up different repos, go back and forth. API calls too, like developing locally. We do some trickery too, where we can develop locally on local databases. So if I want to pull up production level Netlify and test different things and bugs, I can do that. I can pull up a fake database as well. So we use that basically just using environment variables in our script, and also using Webpack as well doing that. So they'd be the trade-offs. And it's also when you have frameworks that are all in mono repos, obviously you get a lot of really quick wins. As far as like Angular, you have a very structured way of starting your project. With JAMStack, it's pretty open-ended. You could use a static-side generator, use a front-end framework. You can use index.html with Gulp. So it's just not as strict in the way you can actually write your code. So that'd be pretty much the trade-off too. And then other things like understanding what APIs to use to do what is also could be a hurdle as well.
Excellent. So I thought I had a question, another one, but my brain just froze. So I'd like to pass over to Amal for last questions.
Sure. So I guess to wrap it up, this has been a really informative show. Thank you so much, Brian. So I guess like parting words on where to learn more and how to get started.
I would say just go to jamstack.org to find out more details about what we talked about today. There's also some example sites up there too. Sites live on the web of people who are using the JAMStack philosophy. I also want to recommend staticgen.com, which is a list of static site generators. A lot of people will reach for an Angular or a Rails or a full monorepo producer for starting a project. But there's a lot of stuff that actually could get done that you don't need WordPress or one of those large monorepos for, which is staticgen.com, which are static site generators. So if you're starting a blog, don't start it with a SQL database, start it with Markdown files. So check that out as well.
Very cool. And if people want to learn more about your podcast, what's your Twitter handle and where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at bdougieyo. That's a Y-O at the end. The other bdougie, he's kind of annoyed because I think he is jealous that I'm more popular than him. Just kidding. But don't tweet bdougie, tweet bdougieyo. Also bdougie on Twitter. And my podcast is JAMStack Radio. We are at JAMStack Radio on Twitter. It's a bi-weekly podcast. I think I said weekly early. Bi-weekly. We talk about JavaScript, APIs, and markup. People in the space, people talking about what their projects they're working on. We tend to heavily talk about a lot of React stuff, which I'm trying to get away from. I want to talk about more stuff outside of React. So if you're interested in coming on the podcast, shoot us a note on Twitter and I'll reach out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. This, like Amal said, this has been very informative. I think we've got a lot of good information here.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the links will be in the show notes. So thanks again, Brian.
Awesome.
All the ones we can remember, at least.
Yeah, keep spreading the jam.
Oh, yeah. This has been episode number 122, Static Applications and JAMStack. Yeah.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform or on Google Plus and YouTube at +the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Erik Isaksen at eIsaksen
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.